My name is Nadine Colbert, and before I take you deep into this story, let me tell you something that most people around me never knew. To the outside world, my marriage ended because I was too ambitious, too proud, too wrapped up in my e-commerce business to give my husband the attention he deserved. That's what they whispered in barbershops and beauty salons. That's the story his family spread until it became gospel. But the truth, the real, unvarnished truth, was a wound I carried alone. For years, Randall and I looked like the picture of stability. He was the easygoing husband who made people laugh at cookouts. I was the one at the dining table with a laptop open, juggling suppliers and shipments while everyone else relaxed. People mistook my drive for arrogance. Nadine always thinks she's running a Fortune 500. I once overheard one of his cousins say. I brushed it off then, but those words cut deeper when the marriage finally broke apart, because in their minds, it was my work that drove him away. But I knew better. It happened one ordinary afternoon at the office, the kind of day I had stayed later than usual to finish inventory reports. I remember the hum of the vending machine in the hallway, the faint sound of a delivery truck pulling off. As I walked back toward my office, I heard muffled laughter, a voice I knew too well. Randall's. I stopped cold when I pushed open my door. There he was, my husband, in my chair, lips on the neck of one of my warehouse girls. My employee. She jumped up like she'd been burned, adjusting her blouse, stammering something about just leaving. Randall had the nerve to look at me and smirk, as if to say, "What are you going to do about it? Are you out of your mind?" I snapped, my voice sharper than glass. He stood, straightened his shirt, and without shame said, "You're never here, Nadine. Somebody's got to notice me." Notice him? In my office, with someone I paid to help pack orders. The audacity was so naked, I couldn't even scream. I turned on my heel because in that moment I understood this wasn't a mistake. It was who he had become. But here's the thing. I never told a soul. Not my family, not our son Damon, not even my closest friends. I let the story play out the way Randall wanted it to. I let him parade himself as the victim of my ambition, while I swallowed the truth like poison. People said I chose my business over my marriage. They said I drove him away with my pride. And I carried that lie because I didn't want Damon to grow up hating his father. But inside, it burned. Every barbecue where Randall cracked jokes about Nadine's empire. Every holiday when his family side-eyed me, whispering about how no man wants to play second fiddle. I bit my tongue because what would exposing him really do except stain Damon's childhood with ugliness he didn't deserve? So I let them believe it. I let them say it was my success, my so-called arrogance, that pulled us apart. They never knew that one betrayal in an office full of shipping labels and unpaid overtime was the real fracture. They never knew that behind my silence was a woman who chose her child's innocence over her own vindication. And that silence became the soil where every other betrayal in my life would later grow. Before I go further, do something for me. It won't take you more than 2 seconds. Drop a love emoji or type the word love in the comments so I know you're with me. Now, let's continue. Because that first betrayal, the one I never spoke of, was only the beginning. And one day, Damon would repeat his father's sins in a way even more brutal. If the whispers about my divorce cut deep, nothing pierced me more than the choice my son made. Damon was still young, barely into his teens, but old enough to be swayed by stories that weren't his own. Randall painted me as the cold, hard woman who cared more about inventory spreadsheets than about tucking her boy into bed. And Damon believed him. I'll never forget the night Damon packed his bag. He was sitting on his bed, shoving clothes into a duffel, his small frame trembling with the urgency of someone who thought he was doing the right thing. "Where are you going?" I asked, my voice careful, trying not to shake. He didn't even look up. "Dad says I can stay with him. He said you don't have time for me." My chest tightened. "Damon, that's not true. Everything I do, every box I ship, every order I stay up late to fulfill, it's for you, for us." He zipped the bag hard, like sealing a verdict. "You're always working. Dad, he makes time." The words stung more than any betrayal Randall could throw at me, because I knew exactly what Damon saw. His father cracking jokes at the dinner table while I sat in the corner with my laptop. He didn't see the long hours keeping the lights on. He didn't see that the groceries in the fridge, the roof over our heads, the new pair of sneakers he loved, those came from the very grind he resented. Children don't measure love in sacrifices. They measure it in moments. And in his eyes, I had given him too few. When Randall pulled into the driveway that night, Damon ran out with his bag slung over his shoulder. He didn't even glance back at me. Randall rolled down the window, smirking like he'd just won some prize. "Don't worry, Nadine," he said. "I'll take care of him. You stick to running your empire." I stood in the doorway, clutching the frame, so I wouldn't collapse. To the neighbors watching from across the street, it probably looked like a boy choosing freedom over rules, a father rescuing his son from a strict mother. To me, it felt like losing Damon twice, once to the lie Randall spread, and again to the silence I kept, because I still hadn't told anyone about that day in my office, the affair, the real reason our marriage broke. And so, the story of me being the harsh mother spread like wildfire. At family gatherings, Randall's relatives treated me like an outsider, shaking their heads, muttering about how no man or boy could live with a woman like me. They didn't see the nights I cried into my pillow, wondering if Damon would ever understand. They didn't see the notes I left on his dresser when he visited on weekends, reminding him that no matter what, I was still his mother, still fighting for him in ways he couldn't see. But as time passed, the distance grew. Damon grew taller. His voice deepened. And with each year that passed in his father's shadow, my voice in his life faded. And the more I built my business, the more people believed the myth that Nadine Colbert had chosen money over her family. What they never understood was that I hadn't just lost a husband. I had lost my son to half-truths, and it branded me in ways no gossip ever could. After Damon left with Randall, silence filled my house in a way that no television or late-night music could cover. I buried that silence in work. What started as a side hustle, a few products listed online, a few orders mailed from my dining room table, quickly became the only thing I could control. I remember those first nights vividly. The glow of my laptop was the only light in the room. My kitchen smelled of cardboard and packing tape. I'd line up boxes along the counter, scribbling addresses, double-checking labels. Sometimes I'd fall asleep sitting upright in a chair, the hum of the printer still running. By morning, I'd drag myself to the post office, smiling politely at the clerks who knew me by name. They didn't see a businesswoman then. They saw a tired mother trying to keep her life from collapsing completely. There were no investors No safety nets. Every dollar I made went right back into the business. I taught myself photography just to make my listings stand out. I learned to write ad copy that sounded warmer than the loneliness that hovered over me. Every sale, even the smallest one, felt like proof that I could still build something, even after losing my son's presence in my home. Meanwhile, Damon was with Randall. Pictures would come back from family events. Him smiling, surrounded by people who saw me as the villain. And while those images crushed me, they also fueled me. I worked harder, pushed longer, convinced myself that one day, when Damon looked back, he'd understand why I never gave up. The growth came slowly at first. Dozens of orders turned into hundreds. My garage became a warehouse, filled with shelves I hammered together myself. I brought on part-time help, women who needed extra cash, and believed in what I was doing. I remember one of them saying, "Miss Colbert, you run this like it's Amazon." I laughed at the time, but inside I took it as fuel. Because people thought my drive had destroyed my marriage, but it was also the same drive that kept food on the table, lights on in the house, and gave me a reason to wake up each morning. Still, the work wasn't glamorous. There were nights I sat on the floor, surrounded by boxes, tears in my eyes, fingers raw from taping. My body ached, but I refused to quit. I told myself, if I can't keep my family together, at least I can keep this business alive. And slowly, the numbers proved me right. Orders poured in from different states. Customer reviews stacked up with words like reliable, fast, trustworthy. My reputation became stronger than the whispers about me being a bad wife and worse mother. By the time most people finally noticed what I had built, it wasn't just a side hustle anymore. It was a thriving e-commerce business, one that would eventually pay for the very cancer treatments that tried to take me out. But for all the nights of victory, watching my balance sheets turn from red to black, shipping out record orders during the holidays, there was always that empty chair at the table. Damon's absence hung over my success like a shadow. Every late night I worked was another reminder that he wasn't there to see how much I fought, not just for me, but for him too. And that was the bitter irony. I was building an empire brick by brick, order by order, while the boy I longed to share it with was growing up convinced that I had chosen the business over him. One day, he would come back and step into the very thing I bled for. But he wouldn't see the sweat or the sacrifice. He'd only see the throne. There's a certain kind of silence that doesn't protect. It poisons. For years, I carried the truth of Randall's betrayal like a stone in my chest, but I never let it leave my lips. Damon never knew what I had walked in on that day in my office, never knew that his father had crossed the line from husband to intruder in my business and in my trust, and I kept it that way by choice. People ask me now, why didn't you tell him? The answer is simple. I didn't want to poison my son against his father. Children don't ask to be caught in the middle of adult betrayals. Damon didn't choose for Randall to be unfaithful, or for me to discover it in such a humiliating way. He only knew that his dad could make him laugh, toss him a basketball in the driveway, buy him a burger after school. What right did I have to taint that with the ugliness I saw behind closed doors? So I bit my tongue. When Damon asked why we divorced, I told him it was because we couldn't agree anymore, because sometimes marriages don't last. When he said, "Dad says you cared more about your business than him," I swallowed the truth and answered, "Your father and I just saw life differently." Even as his words sliced me open, I chose silence over revelation. I remember one evening, years later, when Damon visited briefly. He was taller then, his voice deeper, but his tone carried the same judgment I'd grown used to. "You always look down on Dad," he said casually, as if it were fact. My jaw tightened. "That's not true, Damon." That's what he said. That you thought he wasn't enough. That you were embarrassed by him. I wanted to scream, then wanted to shout the truth until the walls shook. I wanted to say, "Your father embarrassed himself. He betrayed me with someone who worked for me, under my roof, in the office I built with my hands." But I didn't. I looked at my son, my only child, and I chose to protect him from the image of his father that I saw burned into my memory. Instead, I told him softly, "Whatever happened between me and your dad, it has nothing to do with how much I love you." He rolled his eyes, shrugged, and walked away. And in that moment, I felt the full weight of my silence. By shielding him from the truth, I had given Randall the freedom to shape the story however he wanted. I had handed my son over to a version of events where I was the cold, selfish mother, and his father was the wounded man doing his best. That silence cost me more than I realized. It cost me Damon's trust. It cost me the chance to explain why I push myself so hard in business, why I refused to crumble when everything else was falling apart. And worst of all, it planted seeds in Damon's heart that would later grow into resentment, entitlement, and betrayal. Because by the time I needed him most, Damon still carried his father's voice in his head. A voice that told him I was harsh, prideful, unworthy of respect. And without the truth to balance it, that voice became his own. Looking back now, I know my silence was as dangerous as Randall's lies. I thought I was protecting my son. What I didn't realize was that I was also arming him with the very narrative that would one day turn him against me. Years passed before Damon found his way back to my doorstep. By then, the business I started at my kitchen table had grown into something that demanded more space, more staff, more of me than ever. I had fought tooth and nail to stand upright after the divorce, after the silence, after being branded the cold mother. But the day he knocked on my door, all of that felt small compared to seeing my only son again. When I opened it, Damon didn't look like the boy who had left me. He was taller, broader in the shoulders, but his eyes were restless, darting as if they had nowhere steady to land. His clothes were wrinkled, his shoes worn down at the soles. Behind the faint smell of cologne, I caught the sharper scent of someone who'd been running from stability for too long. "Mom," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Can we talk?" I stood there for a moment, my hands still gripping the doorframe like I was bracing against a storm. Part of me wanted to pull him inside and never let him go again. Another part of me remembered every bag he'd packed, every cold glance he'd thrown my way, every word he'd repeated from his father's lips. But love has a way of overpowering memory, and so I stepped aside. He sat at the kitchen table, the same one I'd once covered in boxes and shipping labels. He drummed his fingers against the wood, avoiding my eyes. "Things haven't worked out the way I thought they would," he admitted. "I've tried jobs, but nothing sticks. I thought I'd have it figured out by now." I studied him closely. This was not the confident boy who had chosen his father over me. This was a man circling adulthood with no anchor, no stability, no plan. "What are you looking for, Damon?" I asked, my voice even. He shrugged. "I just need a chance. I need something steady." And there it was, the plea I'd waited years to hear, wrapped not in an apology, but in a request, a chance. Despite the bitterness that still lingered in my chest, despite the long years of absence, I couldn't look at my son and refuse him. So I made a decision that would change everything. I hired him, not as a partner, not as someone stepping in to claim what he hadn't built, but as my personal assistant. If he wanted stability, I would give him work. If he wanted a chance, I would test his loyalty in the smallest ways before I ever trusted him with more. The first weeks were awkward. Damon followed me to the office, where the staff eyed him with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. He sorted emails, answered calls, ran errands. The tasks were simple, but they kept him close to me. And in that closeness, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Hope that maybe the distance between us could shrink, that maybe my son could see me not as the harsh woman he'd once abandoned, but as a mother who had never stopped fighting for him. I told myself I was doing the right thing, bringing him into my circle, teaching him the ropes of the empire I had bled for. What I didn't know was that this decision, born out of love and duty, was also the doorway to betrayal I could never have imagined. I thought I knew what exhaustion was. I thought those long nights with boxes piled high, the smell of tape and printer ink, the endless balancing of bills and payroll had taught me the limits of my body. But nothing prepared me for the word cancer. The doctor's office was too bright, too sterile, the kind of place where bad news echoes louder than anywhere else. I sat across from him, my hands gripping the armrests as he leaned forward with a practiced calm. "Mrs. Colbert, the scans confirm it. We need to start treatment immediately." Those words didn't just knock the air out of me. They rearranged everything I thought mattered. Suddenly, sales numbers and supplier contracts faded. What consumed me was time. How much I had left, how much I could fight, and what would happen to everything I had built if I couldn't return. The treatments were brutal. Chemo left me hollowed out, my body aching as if fire lived in my veins. I'd lie in a hospital bed staring at the ceiling tiles, counting the hours until the nausea eased enough to sip water. Nurses came and went, machines beeped, but in the middle of those nights, I felt completely alone. And then Damon started showing up, sitting by my bed, shuffling his feet, sometimes scrolling his phone because he didn't know what else to do. He wasn't perfect. Sometimes he disappeared for days, but compared to the emptiness I felt, even his uneasy presence was a comfort. One night, I woke to see him dozing in a chair, his jacket pulled over him like a blanket. For the first time in years, I let myself believe that maybe I still had my son. It was that fragile hope that shaped the decision I made. My lawyer had been warning me for months. "Nadine, you need to think about contingencies. If your health worsens, who's going to sign checks? Who's going to approve shipments?" At first, I brushed it off. But as the treatments dragged on, my strength slipping further, the fear grew sharper. What if I didn't come back from this? What if the business I'd fought for collapsed because I wasn't there to push it forward? One afternoon, still weak from a hospital stay, I called Damon into my room. He stood awkwardly at the foot of the bed, his hands stuffed into his pockets. "Damon," I said quietly, "I need you to help me with more than errands now. I need you to take care of things, if I can't." He frowned. "What do you mean?" I took a breath, steadying myself. "I'm going to give you power of attorney. You'll be able to sign for me, handle accounts, make sure the business, and the bills don't stop if I'm stuck here." His eyes widened. For a moment, I thought I saw pride flash across his face, the first real spark I'd seen in him in years. "You trust me with that?" he asked. "I'm your mother," I replied. "Who else am I supposed to trust?" The papers were signed a week later in my lawyer's office. My hand shook as I put pen to paper, but I told myself it was necessary. I told myself Damon had grown, that this was his chance to step up, to prove that the boy who once left me could become the man who stood beside me. As I slid the documents across the desk, I felt a strange mix of fear and relief. Fear, because I was handing over control of everything I had fought for. Relief, because at least I wasn't leaving it in the hands of strangers. I didn't know then that this decision, born out of sickness and desperation, was planting the seeds for a betrayal more devastating than the cancer itself. The day I signed the durable power of attorney was one of those moments where practicality won over pride. I sat in my lawyer's office, the polished oak table gleaming under the fluorescent lights, legal pads stacked neatly between us. My body was weak from treatment, my head still heavy with nausea, but I forced myself to sit upright. This was business. This was survival. My lawyer adjusted his glasses and slid the paperwork across to me. "Nadine, this document grants Damon full authority to act on your behalf. He can manage your personal accounts, pay your bills, authorize business transactions. Durable power of attorney means it holds even if your health declines further. Are you certain you want to proceed?" I looked at Damon, sitting across from me. He wore a press shirt that didn't quite hide its wrinkles, his hands clasped a little too tightly together. For once, his eyes didn't dart around the room. He was focused on me on this moment, and something inside me softened. "Yes," I said. My voice came out stronger than I felt. "He's my son. He's the one I trust." The notary leaned in, watching carefully as I picked up the pen. My hand trembled, but I pressed ink to paper anyway, looping my name in black. With each signature, the authority shifted. By the final page, Damon wasn't just my son, he was my agent, legally empowered to carry the weight of everything I had built. "Congratulations," my lawyer said, sliding the file closed. "It's official." Damon exhaled, as if the paper itself had given him new breath. He looked at me and smiled, small, restrained, but still more than I'd seen in years. "I won't let you down, Mom," he said. I wanted to believe him. Sitting there, with the stamp fresh on the page and the lawyer nodding approvingly, I let myself feel something I hadn't in months. Relief. Relief that if I couldn't sign a check, Damon could. Relief that if a supplier needed a contract approved, Damon would be the one to handle it. Relief that if my body gave out, the business I'd fought for wouldn't crumble in my absence. We left the office and drove straight to the bank. The branch manager, already prepped by my lawyer, shook Damon's hand and added him as an authorized agent on my accounts. I watched as his name appeared on the documents beside mine, his access formalized with a few keystrokes. Debit cards were issued, checks were updated, password resets were completed. From there, we visited the business accounts. Payroll systems were adjusted so Damon could approve transfers. Vendor lists were updated to include his contact information. The staff received a notice that Damon was authorized to make decisions while I underwent treatment. Walking out of those offices, my chest felt lighter. For the first time in months, I thought I'd finally bought myself the one thing cancer had stolen from me, peace of mind. I told myself that handing Damon this power wasn't just necessity. It was a step toward healing our fractured relationship. He was back in my circle, and I had given him a reason to rise to the occasion. That night, exhausted but strangely comforted, I lay in bed and whispered to myself, "It's handled. I can rest now." What I didn't realize was that the relief I clung to was only an illusion. In trusting Damon with my signature, I had unknowingly handed him the keys to a kingdom he had not earned. Illness has a way of blinding you. While I fought to keep food down, while the chemo drained every ounce of strength from my body, Damon was busy building a kingdom of his own, using my name, my business, and the trust one had handed him with that pen stroke. At first, I only caught glimpses. A staff member mentioning Damon had approved a purchase order I didn't remember signing, a vendor calling to confirm new account details I'd never given. But I was too weak to piece it together. My mind was fogged with medication, my days measured in 4 drips and blood work. It wasn't until much later that I learned the full scope of what he was doing. Damon had opened new accounts under the business, accounts only he controlled. He shifted payroll, quietly raising his own salary and redirecting funds to cover personal expenses. He told the accountant that I'd approved everything, and with the power of attorney in his back pocket, there was no reason for anyone to doubt him. But it wasn't just the numbers. Damon was working the people too. In the office, he carried himself like a man born to lead, his voice louder, his tone more confident. He walked the floors not as an assistant, but as a boss. One of my longest-serving staff members would later confess what Damon had told them in hushed conversations by the copier. "She's not coming back. She's too sick. And even if she does, she won't be able to run things the way I can." He said it so often, with such certainty, that some of them began to believe it. They saw me fading in and out of hospital visits, while Damon showed up in crisp shirts and new shoes, issuing orders with a smile. To them, he looked like stability. To Damon, it was an audition for the role he thought was already his. One afternoon, while I was too weak to attend a supplier meeting, Damon went in my place. I later learned he had introduced himself not as my assistant, but as the one overseeing operations. He shook hands like he owned the room, promised faster turnarounds, even hinted at expanding into new product lines. He wore my business like a tailored suit, cutting it to fit his ambition while I lay in a hospital bed, unaware of the alterations. The cruelest part was hearing, after the fact, the way he spoke about me. "She built it, sure, but I'm the one running it now. She never really had the touch for people. I do. I get things done." He said this to the very staff who had once cheered my resilience, the same people who had seen me tape boxes until my fingers bled. He painted me as the past and himself as the future. And because I wasn't there to defend myself, the narrative stuck like glue. By the time I came home between treatments, Damon was already the center of gravity in the business. Staff deferred to him. Vendors called him first. The accounts bent toward his authority. He had taken my silence, my sickness, and my trust, and turned them into leverage. And I was too weak then to see just how far he had climbed while I was slipping. Hospitals have a way of making time feel endless. Days bled into nights, weeks into months. And while I lay in sterile rooms fighting to stay alive, Damon was busy turning my absence into his opportunity. It started with a quiet move that I only learned about later. He brought Marissa, his wife, into my house. That Home wasn't just walls and furniture. It was the place I had rebuilt my life after the divorce, the place where every room still carried reminders of the sacrifices I'd made. But to Damon, it was nothing more than a convenient stage for his new role. He didn't ask. He didn't discuss it. He simply carried his bags across the threshold and acted like he belonged. And Marissa didn't come alone. She brought her world with her. Her clothes filled my closets. Her perfumes lined my bathroom counter. Her shoes scattered across the entryway rug. In the kitchen, dishes I never bought appeared in the cabinets. Slowly, the house I had curated with intention transformed into theirs, with my presence reduced to family pictures hanging on walls they probably wished they could take down. The weekends were the worst. Marissa's parents, Milton and Yvette Reddick, treated my home like their personal resort. They showed up with coolers of food, loud laughter spilling through the halls, music blaring as if the house had always been theirs. They sat on my couches, ate at my dining table, and carried themselves with the kind of ease that comes only from entitlement. My staff later told me they boasted openly, saying things like, "Our kids run this place now." I can picture it even now, Damon grilling in the backyard, his in-laws lounging under the shade, Marissa snapping photos on her phone like she was documenting a victory. To them, my sickness was nothing more than clearance to take over. One of the hardest things to accept is that I endured it, at least for a time. While I lay in a hospital bed, I knew Damon was in my home, living like he owned it. I knew my furniture bore the weight of people who had no right to it. But I stayed quiet. At first, it was because I told myself I had bigger battles to fight. Survival had to come before confrontation. But underneath that reason was something harder to admit: fear. Fear that if I pushed too hard, I'd lose the only son I had left. So I let them stay. I let Damon play king of a castle he didn't build, while Marissa and her parents reveled in comforts they never earned. My home became theirs, and my absence became the open door. They needed to claim it. But silence has its limits. And every time I walked back through those doors between treatments, weakened but still standing, I felt the sting of intrusion sharper. The longer I let it continue, the clearer it became. Damon wasn't just living in my house. He was erasing me from it. It was supposed to be a simple errand. I had just come home from another round of treatments, weaker than usual, but determined to do something normal for myself. I wanted groceries, fresh fruit, bread, a little reminder that life outside the hospital still existed. The line at the store was long, carts full of weekend shoppers. I waited patiently, my basket tucked in the crook of my arm, the weight of oranges and milk pulling at me. When it was finally my turn, I slid my card across to the cashier with a tired smile. She swiped it once. The machine beeped. She tried again, slower this time. Another beep. Her eyes flicked up to me, polite but uncomfortable. "Ma'am, it's not going through." Heat rose to my face. I shook my head lightly. "That can't be right. Try it again." She did. The same sound. A red decline flashing on the screen. Behind me, I felt the shift of bodies, people impatient, carts squeaking as they leaned to see what was holding things up. I forced a smile, though my hands were trembling. Must be a glitch. Let me call the bank. I stepped aside, my basket still full, heart pounding harder than it had in weeks. When the bank representative answered, her voice was cheerful at first. "Mrs. Colbert, how can I help you today?" "My card isn't working. I said, lowering my voice. Its saying declined. There must be some mistake. There was a pause as she typed on her end. Then her tone shifted, professional, careful. Mrs. Colbert, according to our records, your account has been frozen at the request of your authorized agent. The words didn't make sense at first. Authorized agent. I repeated, yes, ma'am. Damon Colbert. He has durable power of attorney over your accounts. He instructed us to suspend your access. For a moment, the noise of the grocery store faded. The beeps, the chatter, the rolling carts, they all disappeared. All I heard was the rush of blood in my ears and that one sentence replaying like a broken record. He instructed us to suspend your access. I closed my eyes and steadied myself against the cool wall near the customer service desk. Damon, my son, the one I trusted with everything, had used the very authority I handed him to shut me out of my own money. Ma'am, are you still there? The bank rep asked. I forced the words out, though they felt like stones. Yes, thank you for letting me know. I hung up before she could say another word. Walking out of that store empty-handed, the humiliation clung to me. I felt every stare at my back, every whisper they might have made about the woman whose card wouldn't work. But what cut deeper than the embarrassment was the betrayal. My son hadn't just dipped into my accounts. He had silenced me, erased me, locked me out as if I were the intruder in my own life. And standing there, weak from chemo and heavy with rage, I realized something chilling. Damon wasn't just running my business. He was trying to run me out of my own existence. I didn't storm into the house. I didn't slam doors or shout his name. I walked in quietly, holding on to the little strength I had left, and found Damon exactly where I knew he would be, sitting at the kitchen table, his feet stretched out, a drink in his hand. Marissa scrolled her phone on the couch, barely looking up when I entered. Damon, I said, my voice low but steady. Why is my card cut off? Why did the bank tell me you froze my accounts? He leaned back in the chair, smirk tugging at his lips. Because you don't need it anymore, Mom. I've got it handled. You should be resting, not worrying about money. Handled. I repeated, stepping closer. You've locked me out of everything I built. That's not handling, that's stealing. His expression hardened, the smirk fading into something sharper. Stealing? Don't start with that. You gave me power of attorney. You signed the papers. You said you trusted me. And trust goes both ways. So trust me when I say, I run things better than you ever did. I felt my hands tighten at my sides. You may have my signature on a piece of paper, but you don't have the right to erase me. This is still my house, my business, my life. That's when his arrogance exploded. He slammed his glass down on the table, liquid splashing over the rim. His voice rose, sharp and venomous, filling the room with words I'll never forget. Go live without my money, he shouted. You hear me? You've lived off me long enough. Go figure out life without what I give you. The room went silent after that, except for the pounding of my own heartbeat. Marissa glanced up, smirked, then went back to her phone, like my humiliation was entertainment. Damon stood there, chest heaving, as if he had just declared himself king. For a moment, I let the sting of his words settle. My own son, throwing my sacrifices back in my face, as though he hadn't been eating from the very table I built. But instead of tears, instead of crumbling the way he expected me to, a laugh slipped out. Low at first, then louder, sharper, echoing off the walls. He frowned, confused. "What's so funny?" I met his eyes, steady and unflinching. "You think this is your money, Damon? You think cutting off my card makes me powerless? You've forgotten one thing. My name is still on everything, and you don't know me half as well as you think you do." For the first time, he looked unsettled, like my laughter had cracked the certainty he wore so proudly. He didn't know what I knew, didn't see what was already turning in my mind. That moment, right there, was the shift. He believed he had buried me, but all he'd really done was wake up the fighter in me. And from that day forward, my silence was over. The morning after Damon shouted those words at me, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. My body was weak, but my mind was sharp. If my son thought I was powerless, it was because he didn't understand the law, and he certainly didn't understand me. I dialed my lawyer's office before breakfast. When he picked up, his voice was calm, professional, the kind of steadiness I needed. "Good morning, Nadine. How are you holding up?" "I'm done holding up," I said flatly. "It's time to take back what's mine. I need the power of attorney revoked. Today." Within hours, I was sitting in his office again, the same oak table where I had once handed Damon control, now serving as the stage for its reversal. My lawyer slid fresh papers across the table. "This revocation immediately terminates Damon's authority. We'll notify the banks, vendors, and payroll systems today. He won't be able to act in your name once these are filed." I signed each page with a steady hand. This time, the ink didn't tremble. It was firm, deliberate, final. The notary stamped it, sealing the end of Damon's legal control over me. From there, the process moved fast. Certified letters were drafted and dispatched to every institution that mattered: banks, accountants, payment processors. Each one carried the same clear instruction: Damon Colbert is no longer authorized to act on behalf of Nadine Colbert. Effective immediately. At the bank, I met with the branch manager personally. He shook his head as he reviewed the documents. "Mrs. Colbert, once this is processed, Damon's access will be revoked. His cards will be deactivated, his signatory privileges removed. Any attempt he makes to use the accounts will be blocked." "Good," I replied. "And I want new cards, issued only to me." The manager nodded. "We'll also flag the accounts for unusual activity. Anything suspicious will trigger direct verification from you." I walked out of that bank with new cards in my purse, the weight of them like weapons reclaimed. Damon might have strutted with the illusion of power, but without my authorization, his empire was nothing more than paper. Back at home, I took the next step. Passwords. Every login Damon had ever touched, email, payroll, vendor portals, was reset. Multi-factor authentication locked him out of the very systems he thought he controlled. One by one, I slammed every door he had opened until the business was mine again, secured under my watch. Then came the house. My lawyer explained it plainly. "Nadine, your name is on the deed. Damon and Marissa are living there only by your permission. That permission can be revoked." Eviction notices were prepared and delivered, each line of text clear and undeniable. Damon and Marissa were ordered to vacate my property. They had no tenant rights, no legal ground to stand on. My lawyer even arranged for the sheriff to enforce it if they refused. For the first time since cancer forced me into that hospital bed, I felt the balance shift. The law was on my side. The banks were on my side. The business was back in my hands. Damon's arrogance had been propped up by borrowed power, and now every crutch had been kicked out from under him. That night, I sat at my desk, not his going over vendor contracts, with a calm I hadn't known in months. Damon thought cutting off my card was the end of me. He never imagined I would cut him off completely, and this was only the beginning. The day of reckoning came sooner than Damon expected. My lawyer had arranged everything. The paperwork was filed, the sheriff's office notified, the timeline set. When the knock hit the door that morning, it wasn't me standing there alone. It was the sheriff, a uniformed deputy at his side, and a legal packet that spelled the end of Damon's squatter's reign. Marissa opened the door first. Her smile faltered as the sheriff held up the notice. Mrs. Colbert has revoked permission for you to occupy this residence. You're required to vacate immediately. What? She stammered, eyes darting toward Damon. This is our home. Damon stormed into the hallway, jaw tight, voice rising. You can't do this. I've been running things here. This is as much mine as hers. The sheriff's tone didn't waver. Son, her name is the only one on the deed. You have no legal standing here. If you don't leave willingly, we'll remove you. For a moment, Damon looked at me, expecting me to flinch, to soften. But I stood silent, arms folded, gaze steady. This wasn't a mother-son argument anymore. This was law versus entitlement, and the law had already chosen a side. With the deputy watching, Damon had no choice but to comply. He and Marissa dragged bags and boxes across the floor, their footsteps echoing with anger. Milton and Yvette showed up too, their voices shrill, calling the eviction disgraceful. But the sheriff shut them down with one firm look. By nightfall, they were gone, leaving behind nothing but a mess and the sour air of their entitlement. That was only the first victory. The second came from inside the business itself. Once Damon's grip loosened, staff began coming to me, one by one, some with guilt in their eyes, others with relief. They brought proof. One assistant laid her phone on my desk, scrolling through text messages Damon had sent. In them, he bragged openly, "She's not coming back. I'm in charge now. We'll run this company my way." Another staffer handed me copies of transfer records. Money had been funneled into Damon's personal account under vague descriptions, consulting fees, miscellaneous expenses. The sums were far beyond what any assistant should have touched. The accountant produced spreadsheets showing unauthorized salary increases Damon had slipped in for himself, hidden under payroll adjustments. Withdrawals appeared on dates that matched his weekend outings, proof that he had been financing his new lifestyle on my dime. Piece by piece, the picture came together. Damon hadn't just overstepped. He had built a parallel life out of my illness, my trust, and my silence. He wasn't just careless. He was calculated. As I sifted through the evidence, the betrayal became undeniable. My son had not only stolen from me, he had conspired against me, telling the staff I was gone for good, treating my house as his inheritance, and bleeding my business as if it were already his. But now, the tide had turned. The house was mine again. The staff stood with me, and the evidence stacked higher with each passing day, ready to crush any defense he thought he had left. Damon believed he could bury me while I was weak. Instead, he buried himself in proof of his own arrogance. It didn't take long for the tables to turn. Less than 24 hours after the eviction, Damon learned what it felt like to stand in front of a clerk with everyone watching, powerless. He pulled up to a gas station on the edge of town, his car rattling low on fuel. Marissa sat in the passenger seat, scrolling her phone, her expression tense. Damon walked inside with his card in hand, head held high, trying to carry himself like the man he'd been pretending to be for months. "Pump 3, he told the cashier, sliding his card across the counter. The first swipe failed. A faint beep cut the air. The cashier glanced at the screen, then back at Damon. "You want to try it again?" He forced a chuckle, waved it off like a minor glitch. "Yeah, go ahead." Second swipe. Same beep. This time, the red letters flashed on the terminal. Declined. The line behind him shifted. A man cleared his throat impatiently. A woman with a toddler on her hip leaned sideways to get a better look. Damon's shoulders stiffened, but he wasn't ready to give up. "Run it one more time," he insisted, his voice sharper. The cashier tried again. Declined. By now, the whispers had started. Marissa had come inside, arms folded, her face flushing. "What's going on?" she muttered under her breath. Damon slammed his palm against the counter. "There's money in there. Try it again." But the cashier's tone had shifted to bored sympathy. "Sir, the system's rejecting it. Do you have another card?" That was the problem. He didn't. Every account tied to my name had been cut off. Every privilege revoked. The very power he had used to lock me out now left him stranded in front of strangers, unable to buy even a gallon of gas. He dug into his wallet, pulled out a second card, one I knew was linked to the business account he thought he controlled. The machine spat it back just as fast. Declined. The silence that followed was brutal. Someone in line snickered. Another shook their head. Damon, who once strutted through my house as if he were untouchable, now stood small under the weight of eyes that saw nothing but a man who couldn't pay his way. Marissa tugged his arm, whispering fiercely, "Let's go." He yanked his card from the reader, his jaw tight, but the damage was done. In that moment, the empire he thought he had stolen collapsed into public shame. When he walked back to the car, people were still watching. Some with pity, others with quiet judgment. The same humiliation he had tried to inflict on me at that grocery store had come back to him, swift and merciless. By nightfall, he had nothing, no money, no home, no business, no power. The kingdom he claimed had been built on borrowed authority, and once that authority was stripped, he was just another man left with empty pockets and a bruised ego. That was the justice. Not my anger, not my revenge, but the simple truth. Damon had engineered his own downfall, and the sound of that card reader spitting back his pride was all the proof I needed. When I look back at everything I've endured, I don't see triumph. I see survival. I survived cancer when the doctors' faces told me not to expect much more time. I survived betrayal, not from strangers, but from the son I carried, the boy I once sacrificed silence for. I survived being cut off from my own money, my own home, my own business, stripped of dignity by the very person I trusted most. But survival is not the same as victory. It's not about standing on a podium, waving a flag, or declaring myself better. It's about refusing to let the blows end me. Each betrayal could have broken me. Each humiliation could have silenced me. But instead I chose to rise, not because it was easy, but because there was no other option. I hear people talk about forgiveness as though it's the cure to every wound. But what they don't say is that forgiveness without accountability is just another gift to the abuser. Damon wanted power without responsibility, control without sacrifice. And if I had simply forgiven him without making him face the consequences of his actions, I would have been handing him permission to destroy me again. That's not forgiveness. That's surrender. The truth is, I don't hate my son. Hatred requires too much energy, and I've already fought harder battles with my body and my spirit. What I do carry is clarity. I see him for who he chose to be, and I see myself for who I chose to remain. I am not a victim of him. I am a woman who refused to be erased by him. The legacy I built, brick by brick, order by order, sleepless night after sleepless night, will never again rest in someone else's hands. I worked too hard to let it be gambled away by entitlement. I bled too much to let it be drained by arrogance. That empire is mine. That home is mine. And my name, the one I signed 100 times to give Damon authority, is still the one etched on every document, every deed, every contract that matters. When I laugh now, it isn't bitter. It's knowing, because I've learned that survival isn't just about outlasting disease or betrayal. It's about reclaiming yourself after they tried to take everything from you. So no, this isn't a story of triumph. This is a story of survival, of cancer survived, of financial abuse survived, of betrayal survived, and of a legacy reclaimed, not through forgiveness, but through accountability. And as long as I live, the empire I built will stand, secure, untouchable, and forever mine.